The world had consumed the image of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban as if it were a secular scripture on how to survive fame. They were the exception to every cynical rule Hollywood had written. In a landscape littered with conscious uncouplings and messy tabloid divorces, they remained a fixed point. When they walked a red carpet, the air around them seemed to thicken with a genuine, almost tactile devotion. He would lean into her, his hand never leaving the small of her back. She would tilt her head, eyes softening in a way she never quite managed for the cameras during a solo press junket. To the public, they were the golden couple, an ethereal actress and a grounded musician who had found a way to bridge the gap between Nashville soil and Hollywood stars. But the architecture of a long marriage is rarely made of the marble the world sees. It is built of softer, more porous materials, shared silences, whispered fears, and the exhausting labor of maintaining a facade that even the architects begin to believe. The cracks didn't start with a scream. They started with the smell of scorched flour and the heavy, humid silence of a Tuesday evening in their Nashville home. Nicole had spent the day submerged in the psyche of a woman losing her mind for a new film. For months, she had been practicing a specific kind of stillness, a hollow-eyed gaze that looked through people rather than at them. It was a role that required her to shed her own skin, leaving her raw and hypersensitive to every vibration in the house. Keith, meanwhile, was drowning in a different kind of silence. He was in the middle of writing an album that felt like it was being pulled out of him through a needle's eye. Every melody he touched felt derivative. Every lyric felt like a lie. He was restless, his fingers twitching for a chord that wouldn't come. When Nicole drifted into the kitchen, her movements were ghostly, her thoughts still half-anchored in a fictional tragedy. Keith was standing over the stove, a pot of pasta boiling over, the water hissing against the flame. He didn't turn around when she entered. He just smelled the bitterness of the scorched pot and felt the weight of her presence, a presence that felt increasingly like an absence. "You're doing it again," Keith said, his voice flat, drained of its usual melodic warmth. Nicole stopped near the island, her fingers grazing the marble. "Doing what?" "Leaving," he replied, finally turning. His eyes were tired, the skin beneath them bruised with late nights and frustration. "You're standing 5 feet away from me, Nicole. But you've been somewhere else for 3 weeks. I'm tired of talking to a memory." It was a small comment, a pebble tossed into a still pond, but the ripples it sent out were violent. In the context of their perfect world, such bluntness was a violation. Nicole's face didn't crumple. Instead, it smoothed out into a mask of professional composure, the kind she used when a reporter asked a question that hit too close to home. "I'm working, Keith. You know what this role demands." "I know what it demands of you," he snapped, the frustration of his own creative block bleeding into his tone. "I'm asking what it's supposed to leave for us. I feel like I'm living with a ghost. I'm tired of being the person who has to wait for you to come back to Earth." The word ghost hung in the air between them, shimmering with a sudden, sharp pain. "A ghost," Nicole repeated, her voice a mere whisper. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling. "Is that all I am to you when I'm struggling? A haunting?" "That's not what I—" "No," she interrupted, her voice gaining a brittle edge. "You're tired. I get it. Everyone is tired of me. I'm tired of me too." She didn't wait for his rebuttal. She didn't look at the pasta or the man she had called her anchor for 2 decades. She simply turned and walked out of the room. Keith stood in the kitchen, the smell of the burned meal filling his lungs, realizing too late that he hadn't just voiced a grievance. He had punctured a hole in the very floor they stood on. He expected her to go to the bedroom to decompress. He expected the usual cycle of cold silence, followed by a late-night reconciliation. What he didn't expect was the sound of the heavy front door clicking shut. When he ran to the hallway, the foyer was empty. Her coat was gone. Her car, usually tucked neatly in the garage, roared to life and swept down the long, winding driveway. For the first time in their marriage, Nicole Kidman hadn't just retreated into a role. She had retreated from the world they had built together. The silence that follows a sudden departure is not empty. It is heavy, thick with the things left unsaid. Keith stood in the center of their foyer, the cool Nashville air still swirling where the door had just been. He waited for the sound of her car to return, for the screech of tires, and the frantic apology he was already prepared to give. But there was only the distant hum of the interstate and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that suddenly felt like a countdown. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He tried to tell himself she had just gone for a drive to clear her head. Nicole was a creature of movement. When the world became too loud, she often walked for miles or swam until her muscles burned. But she never did it at night. She never did it after an argument that felt this, jagged. He picked up his phone. "I'm sorry. I was frustrated. Please come back." He watched the bubbles appear and disappear. She was reading them. She wasn't responding. By the first hour mark, the frustration in Keith's chest had curdled into a cold, visceral fear. He began to pace the house, his footsteps echoing through the rooms they had meticulously designed to feel like a sanctuary. Now, the high ceilings and curated art felt like the walls of a museum, beautiful but devoid of life. He started making the calls. Her assistant, who sounded sleepy and confused. Her sister, Antonia, whose voice sharpened with immediate concern. "She isn't here, Keith. Did something happen?" We had a disagreement. I thought she might have headed your way." Nicole doesn't just head anywhere without a plan, Keith. You know that. That was the problem. Nicole was the most disciplined person he knew. Her life was a series of scheduled triumphs and calculated risks. For her to simply vanish into the Tennessee night was a break in the character she had played for 50 years. He grabbed his jacket and his keys. He couldn't stay in the house. The air felt too thin, as if she had taken all the oxygen with her. He drove to the places that defined their shared map. He checked the 24-hour organic market, where they sometimes went late at night to avoid the crowds. He drove past the quiet studio where she sometimes sat in on his recording sessions. He even went to the park where they took the girls, the swings swaying slightly in the wind like ghosts. Nothing. As the clock struck midnight, Keith pulled over to the side of a darkened road, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. He felt a terrifying sense of vertigo. For years, he had been the one who needed saving. His struggles with sobriety were public record, a narrative of a man kept upright by the unwavering strength of his wife. But as he sat in the dark, he realized he had been leaning on a pillar that was internally crumbling. He remembered a night years ago in a hotel room in London. Nicole had been staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror, removing her makeup with a precision that bordered on clinical. "Do you ever feel," she had asked, not looking at him, "that if you stopped moving, you'd simply evaporate? Like you're held together only by the fact that people are watching you?" He had laughed it off, calling it actress talk or a side effect of a long shoot. He hadn't seen the plea for help hidden in the poetry. Then a memory flickered, a fragment of a conversation about a property she had looked at months ago. A writing retreat, she had called it. A place with a view of the bluffs, far enough from the city to see the stars clearly. He hadn't even known she'd bought it. He had assumed it was just another project, another piece of the KIDMAN urban empire. He turned the car around, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He found the car first. Her black SUV was parked precariously close to the edge of a gravel turnout overlooking the river valley. The headlights were off, the engine cold. It looked abandoned, a dark shape against the graying sky of pre-dawn. Keith approached the vehicle with a sense of impending doom. He tapped on the glass, his breath hitching. Nicole was there. She was sitting in the driver's seat, her coat pulled tight around her, staring out at the horizon where the black of the night was just beginning to bleed into a bruised purple. She didn't look at him. She didn't even flinch at the sound of his knuckles on the window. When he opened the door, the cold air rushed in, smelling of rain and cedar. "Nikki," he whispered. "I don't know how to be the person everyone thinks I am," she said. Her voice was hollow, stripped of its usual elegance. It was the sound of someone who had reached the end of a very long rope. "You don't have to be," Keith said, sliding into the passenger seat. He reached for her hand, but it was ice cold and unresponsive. "Not with me. Especially not with me. I've been performing for so long," she continued, her gaze fixed on the distant line of trees. "I've played the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the tragic heroine, the triumphant survivor. I've worn so many faces, Keith, that when I'm alone in the dark, I can't find my own." She finally turned to him, and the sight broke something in him. Her face, usually so luminous, looked gray in the early light. There were no tears, just a vast, terrifying emptiness. "I'm scared," she whispered, "that if you saw everything I keep hidden, the anger, the exhaustion, the parts of me that are just broken, you wouldn't stay. You fell in love with a goddess. What do you do with a woman who can't even find the strength to stand up?" "I stay," Keith said, his voice cracking. "I stay because I'm the one who knows the goddess is a lie, and the woman is the only thing that's real." He reached out and finally drew her toward him. This time, she didn't pull away. She fell into his arms with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of him, a silent, racking sob finally breaking through the ice. But even as he held her, Keith felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't a resolution. It was a confession. And as the sun began to rise, he realized that the golden couple had died on this cliffside. What was left were two strangers, trying to figure out if they could love the wreckage that remained. The months that followed the night on the cliff were defined by a strange, quiet vertigo. To the outside world, nothing had changed. They appeared at the CMAs, Nicole radiant in a gown of shimmering silver, Keith looking at her with an intensity that the press dubbed eternal honeymoon energy. They smiled, they touched, they performed the roles of Nicole and Keith with the practiced ease of master craftsmen. But behind the closed doors of their Nashville estate, the air had turned brittle. Nicole had returned, but she hadn't truly come back. She moved through the house like a woman navigating a minefield, her movements careful, her voice modulated to a pitch of terrifying neutrality. She was no longer the ghost Keith had accused her of being. She was something more unsettling, a shell. "I feel like I'm watching you through a thick pane of glass," Keith told her one rainy afternoon in the library. He was watching her read, or pretend to read, a script. She hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Nicole didn't look up. "The glass is there to keep the pressure from breaking me, Keith. You asked me to be honest, but honesty is heavy. I'm just trying to carry it without dropping it." She had begun to disappear in smaller, more insidious ways. She would go for walks and stay out for hours, returning with mud on her designer boots and a look of profound exhaustion in her eyes. She stopped playing music in the house. She stopped laughing at his jokes. Most devastatingly, she stopped arguing. She simply agreed with everything, a terrifying compliance that made Keith feel like he was married to a shadow. The turning point came during a sweltering July evening. Nicole had been away for 3 days, ostensibly location scouting for a project she hadn't named. Keith, driven by a cocktail of anxiety and a need for connection, decided to follow a hunch. He remembered the property taxes he'd seen in a folder of their joint accounts. A small, nondescript cottage 3 hours outside the city, tucked into the rugged folds of the Cumberland Plateau. He arrived just as the sun was sinking, casting long, skeletal shadows across the unkempt lawn. The cottage was a far cry from their polished estates. It was weathered, graying, and looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the forest. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open to find a scene that looked like a crime scene of the soul. The living room was stripped of furniture, but the floor was carpeted in paper. Thousands of sheets, journals, old Polaroids, scripts with the margins scribbled over in frantic, jagged handwriting. Nicole was in the center of it, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the debris of her own history. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked relieved, as if she had been waiting for him to find the exit to the labyrinth. "This is it," she said, gesturing to the chaos. "This is the part of me that doesn't make it into the Vogue interviews. The part that isn't luminous or brave." Keith knelt beside her, his hand trembling as he picked up a photograph. It was a young Nicole, before the fame, before the marriages, before the world had decided who she was. Her eyes were wide, filled with a raw, unprotected hunger. "I found these in a box in my mother's attic years ago," she whispered. "And then I started writing. I realized I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I'm allowed to exist. That if I'm talented enough, or beautiful enough, or kind enough, the world won't realize I'm actually hollow." Keith picked up a piece of paper. On it, circled 3 times in red ink, were the words, "I don't know if I'm allowed to be loved this much." The words hit him like a physical blow to the solar plexus. "Nikki, why would you think that?" "Because love feels like a debt," she said, her voice finally breaking. "When you look at me like I'm a miracle, I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm stealing something from you, because the person you love is a character I've spent 20 years perfecting. This," she pointed to the messy, dark, complicated journals, "this is the person I'm scared you'll get tired of." Keith took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I didn't fall in love with the woman on the screen, Nicole. I fell in love with the woman who stayed by my side when I was in rehab and didn't have a single song left in me. I fell in love with the woman who was messy and scared then. Why do you think I'd leave now?" "Because I'm not getting better, Keith," she sobbed, the dam finally bursting. "I'm just getting more tired. I'm scared that if I stop performing, there will be nothing left but a pile of old scripts and a woman who doesn't know her own name." In that dilapidated cottage, far from the lights and the lies of their public life, Keith realized that their marriage hadn't been a partnership of 2 equals. It had been a rescue mission where the roles were constantly shifting. He had been the one drowning once. Now, she was the one caught in the undertow of her own perfectionism. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply sat on the floor among the papers and pulled her into his lap, holding her as the darkness of the plateau swallowed the house. "Then let's be nothing together," he whispered into her hair. "If you're hollow, let me be the one who sits in the quiet with you. We don't have to build a house on sand, Nikki. We can just sit on the beach and let the tide come in."